Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. Great, so I don't need the mic. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I want to thank the Africana Studies Department, the Economics Department, EPAC, to remember, everybody who invited me here. And I feel honored to have the president of the university and the provost tonight for our discussion. And I will also thank the Cameroonians, who were, I think, very instrumental in getting me here. You know, when I decided to run for president in Cameroon, it's the kind of political environment where your family goes, oh my God, what on earth has possessed her? And, you know, is she going to be all right? And is she going to be safe? And I assured them that there were enough Cameroonians around the world who wanted change and that would keep me safe. And throughout this journey that we started about 5 years ago, I have just been constantly energized and encouraged by Cameroonians whom I have never met before, who have contacted me from across the world, and with whom we've been able to build links. So I do want to thank Linus very much, and Suzanne very much, and I understand Sue, who I'm meeting all three of them today. And they have been tremendous in working with me and working out this event. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've had a couple of hours to walk around your very, very historical town, and I am a big fan of history. So it's really nice to be here. I'd like to talk this afternoon a little bit about unlocking Africa's potential. And I want it to be a little bit interactive because I think that, yes, I probably know one or two things, but I am sure that there are people in the audience who do also, and I think we'll have a much more interesting discussion if we can interact a little bit. So I'll stop from time to time in different sections to allow you to ask a few questions. First thing I have to do is figure out how to use this. So the first thing we have to establish is that contrary to popular opinion and contrary to what is presented in most of the international media, Africa is not poor, not by a long shot. Currently we produce about 12% of global energy. Within the last 2 to 3 years, discoveries have more than doubled our gas reserves, so that percentage is probably going to increase very soon. Right now, we produce 9% of global oil. By 2015, we will be producing 13%. In comparison, for example, the United States produces about 1.5% of global oil and consumes about 22%. It is estimated that by 2015 we will be providing 78% of global platinum, 60% of cobalt, 57% of manganese and diamonds. We currently produce over 50% of the world's diamonds in Africa. We also have 25% of the world's arable land. Hence, one of the biggest problems in Africa today, as I was preparing this, there's so many interesting topics that we could sort of go off on. One of which is the huge problem of land grabbing, which is occurring right now in Africa, where we have governments that are giving enormous quantities of lands, mainly to Asian companies, to produce food which will not be sold in Africa, which will not be consumed in Africa. Huge, huge dilemma in a continent where we have not yet achieved food security. So, but we do have the land. Okay. We are also a tremendous market. Most economists feel that the next global growth is going to come from Africa. And here's some of the reasons why. Only 18 to 24% of our population uses formal financial institutions. In a country like Cameroon, it's less than 10%. So you have 90% of the population that has a potential to become what they call bankerized. So have the potential for using financial services. Access to energy is 39% in sub-Saharan Africa, so less than 1 out of 2 people who have access to energy. We are the fastest growing telecoms market in the world. Grew by 49%, but we still have a lot of potential. Only about 32% of our population have mobile subscriptions. In comparison, the rest of the world, about 59%. So there's still huge room for growth in telecoms and in technology as a whole. Internet penetration in sub-Saharan Africa remains at around 10%. So there's still a lot of growth. This is from The Economist. So surprising for some people is that from 2001 to 2010, out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, you had Angola as number 1, Nigeria in number 4, Ethiopia number 5, Chad, Mozambique, Rwanda. So you had a significant number of African countries in the top 10. That number is actually going to increase by 1, they predict, for 2011 to 2015. If you look at the growth rate, this is why the economists feel like Africa is standing on the brink, capable of actually driving global growth within the next decades. That's the potential. Here's the reality, is that right now we still only generate about 2% of current global economic output and less than 1% of global trade. We have 24% of the world's burden of disease, and we only have 3% of the global health workforce. 1 in every 4 Africans is undernourished. You could choose just about any development statistic, whether it's access to water, access to education, access to health care, and you will generally find sub-Saharan Africa amongst the poorest performers. So we have this huge economic potential which we have yet to convert into development and into wealth for our population. And there's all kinds of speculation as to why. And I'm sure many of you have worked on development projects and have written papers and done research as to why. I am convinced that there is a very, not a simple answer, but there's a very direct answer to this, which is governance. While Africa is not poor, it is poorly run for the most part. The large majority of our countries have not been able to convert the opportunity that we have just outlined. Those who have seen tremendous economic growth, the countries that we saw there, many of them, not all, many of them that we have seen there, you have countries like Angola, like Nigeria, which are growing. The population remains without basic services. And so, thank goodness, we have hope on the continent, and it's growing hope. This list gets longer and longer every day. But we do have countries like Botswana. I understand you had a speaker from Botswana not too long ago. Botswana is no longer a developing country, right? It's now a middle-income country. You have Namibia. You have Ghana. Thank God for Ghana. You have South Africa, which, despite a lot of South Africa is one of the most, I think, one of the greatest paradoxes on the continent right now. Extremely wealthy country, fantastic infrastructure in comparison to the rest of the continent, but huge challenges in terms of distribution of wealth. Okay, Mozambique is making tremendous strides. Mauritius has been out of the water for over a decade now. Ethiopia, Cape Verde, all of these countries, none of them is perfect, but all of them are doing a number of things right. And those things have to do with governance. What they have been able to do is to sustainably convert their potential into wealth. And when we look at them, we see a number of things, or at least out of this list, 2 to 3 that are significant. In all of those countries, we see vision and leadership. We see effective political and economic strategies and management systems. So we have seen African countries where we've had very, very strong vision, but where we have not been very effective in developing strategies and putting in place the management systems that actually deliver services. There's effectiveness and accountability in the use of resources, and they have been able to put in place democratic institutions and processes that ensure that leadership rotates. You don't get the same person in power forever and ever and ever. Cameroon, 50 years of independence, we've changed presidents 1 time. And accountability to the people. In the countries that we saw, there's varying degrees of this. And if we go country by country, we could have some very, very interesting debates, right? You take a country like Rwanda, fantastic vision and leadership, very effective strategies politically and economically. Very strong accountability. Rwanda is probably one of the least corrupt countries probably in the world right now. However, when you get down to the last one, it becomes a little sticky. So Rwanda is having some issues in terms of actually instituting democratic institutions, transparent elections that actually give confidence to its people that the country is actually moving that way. You get a country like Ghana, which has seen some great visionaries over the last 50 years. Their political and economic strategies and management systems, they're still struggling with a little bit, but they're doing fantastic on the road to democracy. They are probably the model on the continent right now in their ability to organize elections. We all freaked out when the Ghanaian president died, and we thought, oh my goodness, this thing is going to go off. And the Ghanaians handled it smoothly. They're having their elections at the end of this year. It looks like there are really no problems with that particular system. So depending on the country, they may have more or less of one of these factors, but we find that these are the factors which can take a country sustainably to economic growth and development for its population. So Africa is standing at this very, very unique place right now, where we can use traditional models of inclusive governance, and I'm going to talk about that in the next segment, because contrary to what people believe, our traditional forms of governance in Africa are actually more inclusive than the modern ones that we have been able to build. We have a tremendous demographic dividend, which I'm also going to talk about in a moment, abundant resources, and we are standing at the place where technology and consciousness about the environment allows us to build a model which does not exist. We don't have to destroy the environment as we develop our countries. And we can use technology to leapfrog a number of years ahead. And so we stand, in my opinion, at a very unique place where we can actually take the world in a new direction. The challenge is for us to actually be able to realize this. So I'm going to stop there for a minute, for a few minutes, and ask if there are any questions or comments, just to this general. Yes?
Well, you didn't mention two institutions that I think are probably important, and maybe you could tell us how important you think they are. Free press and an independent judiciary. Are those things that are also being achieved in Africa?
Absolutely. I think that the free media as a whole is playing a very, very important role. I mean, I think you saw with our North African brothers and sisters what role that access to the internet played and their ability to communicate with one another. And that had an effect not only in North Africa, but we then saw the ripple effect in Cameroon, in Zambia. You know, a number of countries have been able to build on that. In terms of the media, I think in many African countries you have a relatively free media. We have found, though, that people who do not want democracy are able to allow you to speak and then withdraw that freedom of speech at any moment where they feel threatened or they feel it has gone overboard. And we actually saw this in North Africa and in the Arab countries with trying to shut down the internet. Cameroon was so afraid about that they shut down Twitter, which was the most ridiculous thing in the world because there's 0.003% of Cameroonians who use Twitter. But those are the reactions of government. So a free media is key. I think one of the things we are looking at, though, is that we see dictators who are able to manipulate that very, very well. And I think Cameroon is a fantastic example of that. You can get on the media and say anything about our president, just about anything, until the day he doesn't like what you said. And then he can throw you in jail. And it's very effective because, how many of us? There's 5. All 5 of us said came out with very strong statements. You know, she said he stole. She said he's a bad president. You know, he said he's throwing people in jail. And so we all said things. And then he looks around and he puts her in jail. And the other 4 of us are going, well, why her? What's the factor? And there is none. But guess what that does to the other 4 of us? We shut up, right? We don't know where the line is. Somehow she crossed the line and we don't even know where it is. So all of us back away. And it's a very, very effective method. And he tells the world, we have a free press in Cameroon. Anybody can go on the media and say anything they do. And it is true. Till the day he doesn't feel like it. So free media, absolutely necessary. It transforms the society, but not a factor which in and of itself, I think, alone can actually bring about the change. And the independent judiciary, for me, goes into those systems of governance. Independent judiciary, electoral system, and armed forces who do not oppress the people. You have a number of key factors with regard to pillars of governance that are very, very important to be able to make these changes. Yes, in the back.
In the sense of the recent growth and sort of your basis for the growth potential rely on these extractive industries. That seemed to be the main basis. To what extent does that then conflict, 1, with the concern with the environment, and 2, also concerns with social justice? Obviously, many of the conditions under which these things are extracted are far from ideal as regards social justice.
Absolutely. So there is a in the countries that we saw there. Let's go back a little bit. Amongst these countries, there are extractive industries. So when you're seeing or let's go back, Angola up here, purely oil, right? Angola with Nigeria are vying 1 and 2 for oil production on the continent. So Angola's growth mainly due to that. Nigeria heavily dependent on that. Ethiopia, not at all. Chad, mainly extractive industries. Mozambique, somewhat, but Mozambique is seeing a very sort of balanced economic growth with a lot of agriculture. They have some land grabbing issues there. Rwanda, well, Rwanda is a very interesting case, right? Rwanda, by the way, is the West's darling, right? Up until a few months ago. But very interestingly, the entire world, we've all been sitting here watching Rwanda sell minerals on the world market. Rwanda doesn't have a single mineral, right? So they've been getting them from Congo at the price of war and putting them onto the world market, and everybody's buying them. And this is very the global community has allowed this to happen. So some of that growth is extractive industries, and they come with a certain number of problems. We are seeing one of the big worries with Ghana is that they have just discovered oil. Oh, not just. It's I think 2 years in now. And that's probably why they are going to experience this 7% growth. And one of the fears is this going to, create the disturbance in terms of their democratic path. So clearly extractive industries is part of that, but we are seeing countries that are diversifying, that are putting a lot of investment into agriculture, and that can build different types of economic strategies. The social injustice with extractive industries becomes aggravated, absolutely. I think on the other hand, we have a number of initiatives today that did not exist 10 years ago, from the Kimberley process to Kimberley processes for diamonds, so that they are not improperly extracted. We have the transparency initiative over the extractive industries, the EITI. So there are a number of initiatives that were non-existent a decade ago, which are becoming very helpful in allowing citizens to know how much their governments are extracting, how much they are getting from multinationals. It does complicate things, but it remains a potential for economic growth. Okay, I'll take a last question.
It seems to me that your focus on governance is taking African as the sole or the main players to solve that issue of unlocking the potential. And I wonder if we can put that at a larger scale, so government of individual countries, but also government at the world stage, and what are the issues that are arising that may also affect what is going on with the individual African countries, or Africa as a continent.
Yes. So my position as an African today is that the rest of the world has been fairly nasty to us for centuries, and I don't think they're going to change. That's my position. I don't think the West is going to change. I think they intervene based on their economic interests. I think they're going to continue to do that. I think they preach democracy, and then if you follow the money, you find that the democracy becomes very shaky. And I ask myself, who's going to be responsible for me? And for me, that answer is me. they're going to be who they are, and I have to understand that, and I have to learn how to navigate my way as a continent, as a country, in that environment, because that is what the environment has been, right? We can go back centuries. We started with slavery, we went to colonization, we have the situation that we have today, and I don't think preaching to the global community and saying, you know, you bad guys, they're not going to change unless we position ourselves in I think it's about power, and I think it's about the ability to negotiate. And we see the African countries that have been able to negotiate their way and to find a place in this global environment are the ones that have been able to establish governance internally such that they can maneuver in the world markets and on the world stage. So absolutely, when you look at the continent of Africa today, somebody was asking about its extractive industries. The oil companies play a horrible role, and they continue to do so in the Gulf of Guinea today. The Gulf of Guinea, moving now from Ghana, we now consider Gulf from Ghana all the way down to Angola, huge, 25% about of the world's oil within the next decades is going to come from that region. I forgot it. I forgot it. In the car coming up here, I bought the newspaper, and I said I was going to bring it to show you, because this is the type of paradox that you were talking about. In this room, how many people know about Zimbabwe? Okay, fair amount. Okay, how many people? The reputation of Zimbabwe right now in the West, and for the last, I would say, about 10 years, right, is awful, right? Mr. Mugabe is a horrible, horrible, horrible man. He does horrible, horrible, horrible things. And what are we going to do to get this horrible man out of power, and so on and so forth, right? Well, in the USA Today, so go home and buy it if you can still find it. USA Today is what do you call the commercial? There's an insert. There's an insert on Equatorial Guinea. There's an insert on Equatorial Guinea, and it's a beautiful insert. And it's got all of these Americans, it's got the president of Equatorial Guinea on the front, there's all of these Americans from these oil companies and talking about how there's growth in Equatorial Guinea and how it's inclusive and it's good for poverty and so on and so forth. Do you think that Mugabe could get an insert in USA Today? I doubt it. I doubt that Zimbabwe, even now, could get an insert in USA Today. Okay? Mugabe is a kindergartner compared to Obiangema. Mugabe has an opposition. They're even in parliament. In EG, you can't have a political party. You can't even gather and discuss politics, right? But they have a whole lot of oil. So they can get an insert in USA Today. And they can get people doing PR and saying that this is a wonderful place to come and to invest and so on and so forth. Now, I take that to be a given, and I think the world has been kind of running that way for a very, very long time. And I think that we as Africans today have to figure out how to find our own solutions in this. Because I don't think that I don't think I have the capacity to change the West, to move it, okay? I think I have the capacity to do a number of things in Cameroon. And the West is going to influence, for sure, but I think that I still have a lot more room to maneuver within Cameroon than I do in that big global space. Okay? Okay, last question.
You haven't mentioned the educational system. One of the things for development is to educate your population, which is one of the greatest
Yes, I will talk about in a minute. Guess who's the #1 educated rate of education on the continent, by the way? Zimbabwe. 98% literacy rate. Yeah, you wouldn't know it. I'm not for Mugabe, but it's just to point out how the West, according to its interest, will determine this guy's a really bad guy, and this other really, really bad guy is maybe not so bad. Okay, so I mean, and I think countries play that way. I think that the world functions a little bit that way. Okay, so I want to talk, before I get to the young people, I want to talk about the extraordinary potential of African women. With some nice pictures in the market. One thing that is very important to realize, and I talked about this, is inclusive governance. Many African traditional societies provided specific spheres of power for women, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at the traditional systems of governance, women had political power, they had religious power very often, and they were economically active. In most of sub-Saharan Africa, women have always been economically active. Okay? Today, African women provide 70% of agricultural labor. When we talk about African farmers, we're talking about women. They produce about 90% of food, and Africa has the highest economic activity rate, including the OECD countries, of women. So women are more economically active in Africa than they are in any other part of the world. The problem is that they're still poor. And so our challenge is, how do we translate those traditional power sharing systems? So in many of our traditional, if I come to Cameroon, for example, I take the west of Cameroon, I take the northwest of Cameroon, I take the coast of Cameroon, you will find that in traditional governance, it is not conceived without women. In the west and the northwest of Cameroon, the Cameroonians who are here will recognize what we call a ma fon. You have a fon, you have a ma fon. And at every level of power where you find a man, you find his female equivalent. Don't get me wrong, it was not an equal amount of power. We still were not, we still didn't have the same amount of power, but we had power. We did have power. One of the biggest losers in colonialism was women. We lost political power because the colonial system came. So we had patriarchy, which looked like this. The colonial system came with patriarchy that looked like this. and they added the two together, so we ended up with this. Okay? So women lost a lot in the colonial system because when colonial governments were set up, when parliaments were set up and so on, there was no reserved space for women. Okay, so they lost the power they had in the traditional system. When we adopted Christianity, there was no space for women. Most of the traditional religions, because of the matrilineage, because in most of sub-Saharan Africa, connecting you with the spiritual is, we have to be sure that if I'm going to connect you with the spiritual, I have a real blood connection with you. So who's the only person who has whom we are 100% sure has the real blood connection? It is the mother. So you will find in most of sub-Saharan Africa till today, when it comes to rights of birth, rights of death, it is always the mother's line who can perform a certain number of rites, because they're the only people who are really sure that they're your family. Okay, so but when we adopted Christianity, we lost all of that because that power also went away, and we so lost it that the vast majority of us as Africans don't even know that it ever existed today. Because we lost our history, we lost our forms of government, we put all of that away, and we don't have that knowledge today. So we're just beginning now, at least with the work that I'm doing in Cameroon, both with our NGO and with my political party, to start with people's traditional knowledge. To say, but look at your village setup. There's the chief and there's a woman beside him, right? There's the council of men and there's the council of women and there's the council of youth. So why are these people not all in your parliament? And when you start from there, from that traditional setup, you link democracy to something which is intrinsic to people. If you don't start from there, then it is something that is imported, and they have, qualms about adopting it. It also means for women securing legal and social status. There are a lot of discriminatory laws on the books in Africa. Okay? And once again, most of these laws are the heritage of colonialism. In France and in England, who colonized Cameroon, for example, I believe in England it was about in 1970 or so, I can't remember the exact date, that a woman could go and open a bank account without her husband's approval, right? Yeah. Well, the law stayed on the books in Cameroon till 1990. Okay, so a lot of the discriminatory law, because we simply took British law or we took French law and we cut and pasted and put it in our own books. It stayed there, and those countries evolved and changed their laws, and we stayed in the same place. Okay? It's also developing economic strategies and policies that convert this very high activity rate. So women are working, but they're very poor. They're very, very poor. They're at the bottom of the economic ladder in every domain. And the focus for women in sub-Saharan Africa should be in the informal sector. The pictures of the market women that I showed you. That's where the women are. They're on the farm, they're in the market, they're in that huge informal sector, which in the better part of sub-Saharan Africa, the informal sector, unregistered business and work, provides 90% of jobs. 90% of people are working in the informal sector, and the majority of them, about 60% in the most part of countries, are women. So we have to have the economic strategies that convert. These people are already working. We don't need to put them to work. We need to figure out strategies that make their work, that transform their work into something that creates wealth for themselves and creates wealth for their countries. We've done a tremendous project in Cameroon with market women, with simple training, business training for market women, helping them to understand financial systems and financial institutions, helping them to have access to technology. So we did computer training for market women, and helping them to be able to come together and function as a group. And that group of women, we worked with about 200 women, saw on average, within a 2-year period, saw their revenue increase by over 150% on a 2-year, within 2 years. And out of those 200, about 40% today have bank accounts and keep simple, formal books. Nothing complicated, just a notebook where they're writing down what's happening with their businesses. But that enables them to integrate formal financial institutions, because they're able to tell a banker, this is how much I sell every month, and this is how much it costs me to sell, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the same. I will conclude with the youth challenge, which is where I would put education. So this is what the African labor force looks like. We have a total population of over 1 billion. Okay, we hit the billion mark in 2010, I think, yes. And it's projected to be 1,150,000,000 people by 2015. 60% of our population is under 25 years old. 60%. We are the world's workforce. Okay? Tremendously young population. The average working age in Africa is 20, in Asia it's 30, and in Europe it's 40. Okay, so you can see where we are in terms of population. It is estimated that by 2040, we will be the world's largest workforce. So we have what is often called the population dividend, right? You hit that billion mark and you're just such a strong workforce that you are able to make an economic jump. However, we're not going to be able to do this automatically. This is really, really important because sometimes in Africa we throw out these and we say, we're the potential, but potential is only potential. You have to be able to, with leadership, with strategy, with management, and with democracy, you have to be able to make it happen for yourselves. Okay? So lots and lots of young people, and everywhere you go in Africa, in a minute, you are surrounded by very, very young people. Okay, and some of the challenges that these young people face. So, the point you were just bringing up, inadequate access to education and training. We still have very, very low rates of literacy. I mentioned earlier, internet penetration at 10% cuts off a majority of our population from this big global, economy and global access to knowledge, which everybody else has. So these are still many challenges. You had a speaker who talked about health and vulnerability to HIV and AIDS. We could add on there, of course, the health issue that is the biggest economic cost to Africa. Nobody know what it is? Malaria. Okay, it's estimated that in some countries up to 30% of working time is lost due to malaria. Okay, so still a huge drain on our economy and young people. So the young people have the same challenge. How do they translate these traditional, and once again, in traditional systems of governance, there is a voice for young people. Young youth have a voice in traditional governance, but we've lost that as we moved to modern governance. Okay, legal and social status again, and economic strategy being the most important. How do we integrate these hordes of young people? You saw in the changes that happened in North Africa, in the Arab world, all those young people who are out on the street are that large majority of a population which is not satisfied, which they don't have jobs. If they do have jobs, they have very, very insecure jobs in the informal sector where they are putting in a lot of labor and getting very, very little in return. Okay? So, despite our challenges, as we've shown, we definitely have the resources and potential to provide both ourselves and the rest of the world with an interesting new model of governance. And here are some of the things that we're doing. Actually, before I do that, I will take a couple of questions again before I conclude. Any more? Yes.
Yeah, birth rates. What's happening with birth rates with a large youth population? Is that coming from high birth rates still?
Birth rates are higher than in the rest of the world. Still, they have somewhat stabilized, and they've stabilized because probably the biggest success story in development in sub-Saharan Africa in the last decade is the reduction in child and maternal mortality. That we have had huge success all over sub-Saharan Africa. So a lot fewer children are dying at birth, a lot fewer women are dying as they give birth. And so that has stabilized birth rates somewhat. We're still relatively high in comparison to the rest of the world. Yes?
Your strategy for engaging the informal sector, how can you make that sustainable? The informal sector pays no taxes. How do you transform it into the formal sector? Or is that part of the strategy?
To some degree, like I said, you know, when I was preparing this, I thought, oh gosh, we could go off for an hour or two or a day or two on the informal sector. The one is that one thing we have to understand about the informal sector is that there is really, in sub-Saharan Africa, not really a formal sector and an informal sector as two separate things. Businesses exist in degrees of formality. Even those market women, they pay tax. Oh, believe you me, the government knows how to find them when they need to pay that tax. They pay a road tax, they pay a city tax, so they have a degree of formality. Somebody knows how to find them when they have to pay. Somehow they don't know how to find them to provide them a service. Okay, and I think that our strategy with informality that we've experimented to some degree of success, and I really believe that if we have the strategy with these informal groups driven by municipalities, driven by the city, and driven in a way that rewards formality. So if you register for your tax, you get access perhaps to some business training. You can go through some business training which can help you to see. What we did with our market women was simply educate them about what tax they had to pay and what tax they didn't have to pay. They were just running away from the tax man because they didn't even know what they were supposed to pay and what they were not supposed to pay. And the tax people are generally corrupt. So they will knock on your door 10 times. In fact, they would rather you not pay your tax. Because as long as you haven't paid, you're a good client for corruption, right? As soon as you've paid, then you can put up your little piece of receipt or paper and say, I've paid. So the tax people don't really like you to pay the formal tax, you know, because they can keep coming out. So when you educate these people and actually demonstrate to them that it's better for their business to pay a certain level of tax. But that also means that the municipality can't have a service where they spend, these are people in the informal sector, they make their money from day to day, they live from day to day. They're making maybe 50 cents to those who make a lot, $2 a day, right? So they sell, they go home, they take that food, and that's what they eat the next day. They sell, so if they come to the municipality and they have to spend half a day to pay that tax, they've just lost half a day's wages. What are they gonna eat tomorrow? So if the municipality wants them to be formal, they have to change the way that they offer their services so that they can make it fast and efficient and so on. And everybody wins in this. Because the tax officials who go, you know, doing corruption, they don't take that money to the city. It's in their it's in their pockets. So driven by the municipalities, a strategy with the informal sector can be very, very effective in moving people from one level to the next. There are other issues there in that in the informal sector you have, what do you call, entrepreneurs who are not entrepreneurs by choice, right? They don't have a job. So what do? They pick up a pan, put it on their head, put something in it, and they begin to sell. Now they're a business person, okay? But they're probably not a really good business person, right? So you have the challenge that not everybody in the informal sector who is an entrepreneur is actually a good entrepreneur. So that first stage of education and formalization can be really easy, and it can create a huge jump, in income like we saw, but the next level is a lot more difficult as you try to make those businesses truly sustainable and truly effective. But that's a whole other 2 days. Another question? Okay, great. So let me go to some of the things that we are doing on the ground. One of the things that we're doing in a country like Cameroon, politics in most of these countries where you have presidents who stayed for a very, very long time and who are very undemocratic, they make politics a dangerous business. They make politics a dangerous business. In Cameroon, politics is dangerous physically. It is dangerous for your family. They can get threatened. It's dangerous for your business. It can be closed down. And so many people do not want to take that risk. What we do is we educate them on their political rights, but most especially we educate them on the connection between politics and their job. The connection between politics and the fact that their kids are not going to school. The connection between politics and clean water. So we educate people on the fact that the reason they're not getting basic services is because the politics is no good. And bringing those two things together enables people to become empowered, because people will fight for their food or their water or their education, but they're not going to fight for politics as politics, right? Not interested. Even you guys have that problem. So a little bit like you now, you want the connection between all this political talk up here and your job, right? Your job security, your creation of employment, and so on and so forth. So we're making that connection by creating youth political circles, women political circles, and we do grassroots political education. We're in the markets, we are in the train stations, we are in the bus stations, giving people basic education about their political rights and helping them. We're coming into an election next year, helping them to register to vote. Okay. We also work with groups, empowerment for the informal sector, people with living with disabilities. People living with disabilities in many, many of our countries are just completely not integrated into the society. 10% of the population estimated in sub-Saharan Africa lives with some form of disability or the other. And in general, not taken into account at all. We have some very interesting experiences in Cameroon on people with disabilities being able to inform themselves and educate themselves both on the political process and the economic process. Okay. And grassroots economic groups as a whole, fishermen, farmers, and so on. So I firmly believe that for us to have sustainable democracy, it has to come from the bottom up. It will be great to have a great leader. I want to be president. I'm still running. Some people ask me all that. I'm still running. And I think that a strong leader can fast forward this process, can make you do a quantum leap. But I think it's only sustainable if the people are carrying it as something that they see for themselves. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And our basic tenets are the importance of taking back our power, transforming our leadership, and building new and sustainable systems for ourselves. So we are busy embracing political power because we firmly believe that if we want a different country for ourselves as Cameroonians, if we want a different continent of Africa, and if we want a different world, because we believe we have something to give to the entire world, if we want that, we have to embrace political power in order to be able to transform it. Merci beaucoup.
Are there any questions? You guys good?
Final, yeah.
Foreman.
My question is, I mean, I like your presentation, excellent presentation. My question is, how do you measure the progress you've made with the organization? You are talking about creating an awareness from the grassroots to the top. I'm from Ghana. We had a revolution in 1979. Ghana is what it is today because of that revolution. We didn't spend time going back and forth. Your president has been in power for close to what, 30 years?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, how long is it going to take you to, how do you measure progress?
Yeah.
And the political changes that are going on in North Africa and several other places, what does that mean to Cameroonians? I mean, I always pick on Professor Linus
Yes.
on this same issue. So could
Yeah.
you please, give us an idea of where
Yes.
you are and how far you've come?
Okay, thank you. See these Ghanaians? Yeah, I think, I met your president in 2009. I was here in the United States and I spoke at an event that just went on last week, the Clinton Global Initiative. And I spoke and I got off the panel and he had somebody call me over and he looked at me and said, "There's people like you in that country and you let that guy sit there for 30 years." So I think that's the question you're asking. I think that each country has its own path. And Ghana had its path. You were lucky. Ghanaians didn't get up and have a revolution. Rawlings and his boys did, right? That's the reality. I mean, you all can take credit for it now, but, but the reality is that it was not a people's revolution. It was a revolution of a group of armed men, right? They carried out the revolution. What we've seen in North Africa is real people's revolutions. We're seeing that people's revolutions are very difficult to actually convert into revolution, right? The system fights back, and now it's a struggle between those who created the revolution and those who are holding on to the system. So I think there is no perfect path. Botswana, Namibia were able to do this just coming out of apartheid. They did it, they set the right systems in place, and they continue. So I think every country has its own path. I think our job in Cameroon is to continue to educate people, to empower people. We see Cameroonians are not, sitting down and doing nothing. Somebody is on protest, on strike every single day in Cameroon. And we do it at the expense of our lives. I have been kidnapped, I have been water hosed, my colleagues have been put in jail, so we do it at very high risk, and we continue to do it. Because we believe that there will come that moment where we will get to critical mass. It's still a minority of us, unfortunately, who are willing to risk, because what we do is we risk our lives. When we go out for a protest, we have no idea what's going to happen. We prepare ourselves psychologically to be beaten. We prepare ourselves psychologically to be jailed, and we continue. I personally believe in nonviolence. Okay, that's just my personal, my stance. I personally believe in nonviolence. I don't believe in violence. The Ghanaian case is the exception that confirms the rule. Look at the rest of Africa. Every time we've tried with violence, we end up with Liberia. We end up with Sierra Leone. We end up with Rwanda and Burundi. That's not the path I want to go down. I'm lucky enough to travel all over Africa. I see what happens, how long it takes to get the guns out of a society. It takes decades and decades and decades to get the violence out once you let it in. So I'm a firm believer in nonviolence, even though it is probably a longer, more difficult path. So all I can tell you is that we're on the road. I can't tell you which day we're going to get to the destination. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Very quickly, I'm curious as to the relationship between the infrastructure development building, for example, in Ghana, that China has been doing from Accra to the sea. How will the Africans, and specifically as it might possibly may relate to your country, how will that be managed so that it does not become a system of exploitation of both labor and individual?
There's another topic we could do for 2 days. China and Africa, right? Very, very interesting dynamic that is going on. And you probably hear Africans all the time saying to the West, leave us alone. You know, we're dealing with the Chinese. They don't ask so many questions. They're not worried about our governance. And I think that reaction is legitimate, right? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous for the West, who has supported the Mobutus and the Mubaraks and the Ben Alis and so on for 30, 50, even Biya, my president, is supported by France. So it's absolutely ridiculous for countries that have supported these dictators for decades and decades to now stand and say, you're dealing with China. They don't look at governance. Really? You know, and I think you have Africans who have a reaction that is like, no, really, get out of my face. I think it's the wrong reaction because it is just a reaction. It's not a strategy. My question often to ourselves as Africans is that China clearly has a strategy for Africa.
Indeed.
Where is Africa's strategy for China? The problem with our relationship with the Chinese today is that we don't have a strategy. The Chinese do have a lot to offer. They have a lot to offer in terms of technical know-how, in terms of knowledge, in terms of driving development. We should partner with them. There is no moral reason why I would partner with the United States and not partner with China. That just doesn't make sense. The two have done some awful things throughout history, right? So, but I must do it in my own best interest. And the problem that is happening right now in Africa is we do not have a strategy for dealing with the Chinese. We've opened our doors wide open. They have a very clear strategy. They are invading our countries, taking over large segments of the economy, negotiating natural resources for decades. I mean, they're buying decades in advance with some very, very corrupt presidents, and we're going to have to live with this. So it's a very troubling situation, and we should not, in my opinion, as Africans, just be reactionary. And you know, it's not. I say to Africans all the time, it's not about what the West thinks and you know what China. It's more about what we think. That's what we should be worried about. And so far, I see very few African countries that have a true strategy. So this is a concern. But I do think China has a lot to offer us. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
As women move back into the public sphere, are men resisting this shift in their roles?
Yes and no. I say it's my answer to that. Yes, because I think, you know, it's about power, right? And anytime you threaten power, it's gonna resist. So I think that there is some resistance. It depends also on the country. In a country like Cameroon, I can tell you when I was running, I felt that the fact that I was a woman was much more of an advantage than a disadvantage. One is that women got very interested, very engaged in the political process, and a lot of men said, there is no way you're going to be as corrupt as a man. A lot of men felt that, you know, but we are a country, Cameroon is a country where women are not, we're very open and very present in the public sphere, so it's not a shocking thing. It is surprising to see at the level of the presidency of the republic, but it's not a, you know, we have a lot of well-educated public women who are present. Yeah.
Okay, so probably have to have this as our last one.
Yeah, last question. Did you? Oh, I thought
no. Babu Bamba, are you serious?
I'm serious now. I just wanted to react onto the question that was posed earlier about China. And when you're talking about lack of strategy on the part of the African, whether this may be also tied up to the fact that China is represented by one unit, and when we talk about Africa, it's a multiple units, and that might be individual country may have a strategy, but that doesn't overlap with the strategy. So the question becomes for me whether, and which, if you want, you can elaborate on that. The issue of the supra-African governance, for example, might be a solution in that kind of situation where you have multiple voices coming from Africa versus one voice coming from China. Even the companies are sponsored by the Chinese
by the
government.
state. So quick on that, because there also is another large topic. But thank goodness we are seeing the supranational institutions moving in the right direction, in my opinion. The African Union is very far from what it should be, but we are seeing the regional bodies moving economically. I think the East African community is moving. We are seeing, SADC with South Africa, they're very, very strategic, and they're moving very well. I think ECOWAS is probably showing the strongest commitment to governance, right? We have seen ECOWAS denounce its own members when they have fallen off the rails on questions of governance. So we're seeing these supranational bodies begin to move in the right direction. However, we're still a long ways away from really having strong regional, political, and economic strategy. And I don't agree with you. I haven't seen even one country that has a strategy for China.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alvin. We'll end on that. Thank you, everybody, for coming.